Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. This video is all about making your own leaf compost. Going to go over ways to jumpstart the pile. We're going to look at compost, leaf compost that is 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, and even 4 years old. Talk about the pros and cons, different ways that you can make leaf compost. This video is also part of my series for 2025, if you want to subscribe, on gardening on a budget and really simplifying it. It's really focused towards new gardeners, where it's really easy to get overwhelmed with having to buy all this stuff, or at least thinking you have to buy all this stuff to get started. So in the video description, I will post links on how to build these garden pens. We are just focusing on leaves, pine needles count, and we're not focusing on grass, garden debris, weeds, and all that. That's a different kind of process. More microbes are involved in that. Usually in leaves, it's more about molds, worms, and just a slower process of microbes breaking it down. But I also want to talk about 3 ways that you can jumpstart your leaf mold, because it can be a slow process. It could take a good 2 years for this to break down. In the first year, this whole pile is going to drop down, and worms are going to come in the bottom, molds are going to break it down, fungus, there'll be microbes and stuff like that, but it can be a slow process. So there are ways to jumpstart it by adding in nitrogen. We're going to use blood meal organic. We're going to use the chemical types, that's budget friendly. And then we're going to also talk about using urine, which is high in nitrogen. The cheapest way to go about it is to use urine. It's free. You have to collect it, and you want to mix the urine to about a 5-to-1 ratio with water, and you would pour it into the bin, into the compost pen. I'll talk about that. Next to the chemical fertilizers, and then blood meal is a little bit more expensive. We'll get to that. I also again want to show you the different degrees of compost, of the leaf breakdown for the compost. The most important thing, and I really want to stress this, is moisture. Now here in Maryland, I'm in Maryland Zone 7, we've had about 4 or 5 weeks of no rain. We actually were on restrictions. We couldn't have fires or anything like that outdoors because it was so dry. Last night it rained. We got an inch of rain, and you would think, okay, the compost pile is going to be nice and moist. Well, this is dry right up at the top. If you dig down into the center, it is bone dry. The fungal, the molds, the microbes need water. You have to keep your pile damp. It should be wet in the core. That's how it's going to break down. If the pile becomes dry, it'll still break down, but it can take an extra year, because the water's not there. Without water, that's the number one point. Without water, without moisture, this is going to break down much, much more slowly, and it's going to just bring the process to a halt. So I will go over a watering of your compost, sounds funny, but of your leaves, and you really want to sit up here and soak it in for a good 10-15 minutes to get the water through, and then maybe do it again in the next day. Once the pile is soaked, the water kind of stays in there, but you do have to keep an eye on it. If you get 4 weeks of drought like I have, it's going to be a problem. You also want to keep your leaf pen not covered, unless you want to come out and water it more often. Let the rain fall on it, but you absolutely have to have moisture. Before we get to the ways to jumpstart it with these different methods, let me show you different degrees of breakdown of leaf compost. These are 2 compost pens. I've already done videos on these. I will put the videos in the video description. They take about 15 minutes to build. You can just do a basic circle with some fencing, or you can put in T-posts. This one's a little bit more expensive. But as a way for simplification and budget gardening for the new gardeners, I just really want to explain the first thing you should make is a compost pen. Put your leaves in there, put your garden debris in there. If you like gardening, you're going to be around for a long time. This is the greatest way to save a ton of money, improve your soil, and just have a better garden. So get that compost pen set up first. It really, really makes a difference. And all you do is you really fill it. It can go anywhere. It can go in the sun, go in the shade. You can put a top on it. If you put a top on it, maybe you're in an area that gets just tons and tons of rain. You do have to make sure you come and keep the pile moist. I prefer leaving no roof so that the water comes in. And again, like I was saying, water is key for the compost to break down. There are several ways to make leaf compost. This is just a trough. There is a single hole where the water drains out. It's about 1 inch up. The compost here, this is all leaf compost. This is really, the stuff over here is about 3-4 years old. Very spongy, holds water. We did just have rain. One of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to put a few more holes in there because this was staying just a little bit too wet. Worms do get in there through the hole that's on the side. You can't see it right now. But you definitely need drainage. If you're using a container, any kind of container, metal, plastic, whatever, you have to allow the water to drain out. But the compost in here, I've been using it in my garden. This is really 3-4 years old, and I would just pile up the leaves and then they would decay down. The next year I did it again. Third year I started taking some of the stuff out, would put the leaves in and just let it break down. But it's just beautiful stuff. This goes a long way. It's great for containers. The particles are really fine. Another way you can do it is you can just use trash cans. The compost here is 2 and 3 years old, and I would use 2 cans, and to get started I just filled them up with leaves. They broke down. The next year I took the leaves that were still left that were kind of whole in this container, threw them into there, dumped the other stuff into here, filled it back up with leaves. But I was basically creating leaf compost, removing what wasn't decayed, and then putting it into a single container to break down. And I can just come out, get this as I need it. It's not as fine as the first stuff I showed you, but it's almost full after 3 seasons, and it's free. This is what your garden needs. It holds water, supports worms, soil life, and really, feeds your plants. Now, leaf mold feeds a little bit differently than compost that's broken down from yard waste, garden waste, lawns, etc. Tends to be a little bit more nitrogen in the group over here, a little bit less in here. But the benefit of leaves is worms get in there, they leave behind worm castings. So a nice combination of leaf mold, compost from your garden, from your grasses, from your greens, etc. is the best way to really go about it. But look at all this stuff in here. I mean, that is free, and that's just from putting leaves into the containers and kind of just moving them back and forth. Let me show you another way to do it. This is probably, well, the pen is the simplest way. Just throw it in there, let it do its thing. As this breaks down, you don't have to remove all the tops. This opens up. You don't have to remove all the leaves that haven't decayed from the top. You can just get to the bottom, dig out the stuff that you want, and just keep the process going. This is a compost station that I built out of pallets. They were free, got them from a friend who had a Girl Scout troop. So you can get the supplies pretty cheaply if you kind of look around and talk to people. Do a lot of the green composting over there, again, yard waste, garden waste, lawn clippings and stuff like that. Over here, it's more of my leaf compost. I wanted to show you this design. Now you don't have to, get as elaborate as this. Sometimes it gets overwhelming having to build stuff. There is some roofing on there, but I took out some of the roof slats so that the water does get in there. I'm going to show you an example of a mistake I made on that last one that, has a roof. So the compost in here is 2 to 3 years old. I removed most of it, put it onto this tarp. I'll show you that in a second. Compost right here that's the 2nd year. And I took out some of the leaves just to show you what's down there. And then the compost in that container is also 2 years old, but it's had a roof on it. Moisture hasn't been getting to it, so it didn't break down like this one right there. So I would just fill this whole bin up to the top. And then I can drop in this design, I use these boards to drop in. And I have a video on how to build this. Let me get this right. And they just drop down right here, and then I can put another one on and another one on and another one on. So I would just work the leaves all the way up to here. So after several years, they break down, and I would use leaves that were partially broken down for mulch sometimes in the fall. I would just dig down into the pile, especially when it gets down like this. Like I didn't add any leaves last year to that pile. It just finished out what was there. Just dig down to the bottom. This is what's down there. This is dry too because we had that drought. But look just how nice that is. You can just mix this right into the top several inches of your soil, into your containers. A little bit of earth in there because, I was scraping the bottom out. Nothing wrong with that. Worms get in from the bottom. You get a nice mix of the leaf compost, worm castings, all kinds of different microbes in there. It's just really good stuff. But most importantly, it's free. Now, just from the bottom, like up to the edge there, it was not quite as much that's in that container. I dug that all out and we get this huge pile. I mean, so it does take time. It's going to take 2 years or so for everything to get going and get set up. But then you're going to be able to just to come into your piles and just get wonderful stuff. Now I'll get in here with the shovel, dig that out. All this darkness is really from the leaves. Totally decayed, broken down. And it's a lot right in there. You might think, oh, it's not that much, but it is. Now, I've had a metal roof up here. That has to get removed. And what happens is the process just slows down. Down at the bottom, the moisture stays, and there's some good stuff in there. But all this should have broken down, and it's just lack of moisture. But what I would do is I would just take all that. That's going to just go on my garden for mulch. And then you dig your way down, and you find all this great stuff. The point being is that if I didn't get started, well, I really started this 5 years ago when I moved here, but it's going to take about 2 years for the leaves to break down and for you to really get compost. But you can jumpstart the process using these tricks. This is predominantly leaves, but you can see that I have some grass mixed in there. So one of the things that you can do is you can use grass. It's high in nitrogen, very green, which typically means it has a lot of nitrogen. And you know that when you put grass in a bag, a day later it heats up. The microbes are using that nitrogen, multiplying, breaking stuff down, and that heat really breaks the grass down quickly. But of course it begins to smell, and you really don't want to do that straight with grass. So if you blend it with leaves, you kind of get the best of both worlds. Now, this is not hot composting. That's a whole other process and a whole other video. But I would just put in a bunch of leaves, then I put in a bag of cut grass, a lot more leaves, bag of cut grass. That's adding in the green. It's going to help speed this up and decay it. Everything up here, the top half is brand new. And again, it rained an inch yesterday, and look, I mean, it is just dry. So we're going to use this as a test area when we come to watering. But it's going to be a good 10 minutes. I mean, you want the water to soak all the way through. Get that pile wet the first time. Coming down here, this is from last year. It's not fully broken down, but if we get into the bottom here, you see the process is starting. And I'll just kind of let this go this year. What I might do is, if this drops, I've got some good stuff down here. I'm just going to take what's left up here, and maybe I'll throw it into that pile. And this way I can access all the completed leaf compost. It doesn't have to be complicated. You just have to get started. That's the biggest, I think, failure for most gardeners, when you have the space. I understand if you don't have the space, it's an issue. But you know, when I finally moved to this bigger property, first thing I did was set up all these compost bins, and I highly recommend that. Here's a quick tip related to design. My hose, my house is way back there. The hose will come all the way out. I can get to these compost bins right there. I can get to that garden, but the hose is not going to come all the way out here. And it's a little bit of a problem because you saw how dry the pile was. This still works, but this pile is going to be slower until the heavy rains come. If you get heavy rains and it soaks that pile down well, you're good to go for a while. I don't want you to feel like you got to water every month or every week, but you got to make sure a big pile that you make, I just made this a couple weeks ago, that it's soaked down, and you're gonna have to use a hose for that. So if we use these ways to jumpstart it, if I put down the blood meal, and the blood meal would be kind of just scattering right in the center. You want the high nitrogen. Blood meal is a 1200 NP&K, so it's 12% nitrogen. You want it right in the center, and then you would water it in. The nitrogen would mix in there, help the microbes multiply, break everything down. But it's going to be problematic because I'm not going to be able to get enough water out here to do what I want. So let's go in the direction of chemical fertilizers. Chemical fertilizers will not hurt you or your garden. If you overuse them and abuse them, it can affect the soil, and it's not a good way to go. You need organic matter. So chemical fertilizers are just kind of like a vitamin. This is a 24-8-16, really high in nitrogen. That nitrogen is going to be used by the microbes in this pile, and it's going to speed up the process. What you can do, and the directions are usually 1 tablespoon per gallon. There's 2 gallons in there. I added 4 tablespoons. Yes, it's a chemical type fertilizer. If you don't want to do that, stick with me. We'll be talking about using the urine, and we'll be talking about using the blood meal. Double the ratio in here, loaded with nitrogen, and I'm just going to pour it into the core. You want it in the core because the moisture is going to stay in there. That's going to keep up the activity, and that will just help speed up the decay of this pile. Plus you're adding in all the other elements that usually come with the chemical type fertilizers that will benefit your garden. They really don't cause any harm, especially if you're doing it this way. And this is going to stay here for a year, and it's going to help break the leaf mold down. Now, in a perfect world, I'd want to soak this a good 5 minutes, get that nitrogen mixed all the way through to the bottom, but I can't get out here. So the solution, just putting in the chemical types, mixing it in there. You could do it with the blood meal, but then you're still going to be waiting for all that rain. So let's take the blood meal over to the side. This is my compost pen that can be accessed with the hose, so we're going to be able to put plenty of water on here. This is blood meal. This is organic, but it is made from pig's blood. It's basically slaughter animal blood that they freeze dry, they stick in a bag, and they sell it to you. This is a 1200 NP and K, 12% nitrogen, high in nitrogen. Nitrogen is what the microbes need to multiply, do their thing, and help digest all these carbons, all these browns. So when you add in nitrogen, be it grass or chemical fertilizers or blood meal or urine, it speeds up the process of decay because all that nitrogen feeds microbes, they multiply, and they digest things quicker. Now let's pretend, this does have some grass in here, but let's just pretend it's all leaves. So this pen is 4 feet high, 4 feet wide. With something like this for the Jumpstart, I recommend using 2 or 3 pounds of the blood meal. Now again, this can be expensive, $8, $9. This was on sale. I always buy my stuff at the end of the year. Being in Maryland, come November, December, stuff goes on sale. So I only got this, I think it was $3. You want to take the blood meal and you're going to just scatter it right into the core. The idea is you want all the nitrogen to go right down in the center. Over the winter, the outer part's going to insulate it. The center will stay hot, it will stay warm, it will break down. You actually see your pile collapse inward. That's all good stuff. That's what you want to have happen. You don't want to scatter the nitrogen everywhere and just water it in and it's only on the top. Our focus really is the center, maybe a 2-foot circle, and then going straight down. And 2 feet, I believe, is 60 centimeters. So 60 centimeter circle going straight down. And the core of this pile will heat up and speed up the process. So I'm just going to use all 3 pounds. I mean, it is a lot. But for $3, it's definitely worth it. Now, I don't have any urine, but if you were going to use it, you want to really mix urine a 5-to-1 ratio. So if you use a gallon of urine, you want to get 5 gallons of water on there. That's usually for spreading it out and using it throughout your garden in different places. You can just collect the urine, put a gallon or so right into the center, and then you're going to soak it down. Dilute the urine, get all the nitrogen down. So let me grab the hose. I'll show you a little bit of this process. But remember, this is just bone dry after a good inch of rain. You can see some of the mold already forming on here. So that's how it breaks down. I mean, and just to recap, the nitrogen in the blood meal, 12%. The nitrogen in the chemical types, 24%. You don't want to use other forms of fertilizer where the percentage of nitrogen is low. Really, I think under 8 or anything like that. It's just not going to give you the bang for your buck for doing all this. Also, if you're just getting started, you don't need to be doing this. Just get the pen set up like I was talking about. Throw the leaves in there, throw in your yard waste, your garden debris. Get that pen set up, let it do its thing, and in a couple years you're going to have tons of compost, and that's really what you're going to want for your garden. So we have 3 pounds of the blood meal right there. Going to soak down this pile, get the water, nitrogen down into the core. If we were using the urine, we'd put a gallon or so right into the middle, do the same process. And if I was using the chemical fertilizers like I just showed you with the 4 tablespoons, can't get the hose over there, but I would just pour that in there and then do the same thing. You want the water to go down there. The problem is even though you think, okay, you've wet those leaves down, dry leaves are hydrophobic. They don't want to absorb water. So the water sometimes just trickles right through, goes down to the bottom, and the leaves don't really absorb a whole lot. So you may have to do this several times, over the week or so. So we're just going to start by soaking everything down. And, I will cut through this so you don't need to watch this for 10 minutes. But you're starting with just going right where the pile is, right in the core, and you're just going to keep watering until a lot of the blood meal starts to dissolve, rinse down, and this could take a good 10 minutes. If you're using the urine or the chemical type, it's going to wash down quicker. But what's most important is to understand that even if we do this, like right here, for 5-10 minutes, it doesn't mean that the leaves are going to absorb a ton of water. So why am I saying this over and over again? The biggest failure in speed of leaf compost and compost in general is lack of water. So you want to take the time to really get everything going. Now it's going to take a good 10-15 minutes for the blood meal to dissolve and go down, and it's not going to dissolve 100%. You can go in and just kind of rub everything through, get the blood meal mixed in. That will help keep it damp and it will do its thing, but it's really a good 10-15 minutes. Now, just so that you're not overwhelmed trying to soak the entire pile, the outside and everything like that, you can just concentrate on that center core, that 2 feet, that 60 centimeters. If you get the core nice and wet and it stays wet, everything's going to do its thing in the center. The pile will collapse, and as it rains, the outer part out here, that stays damp anyway, and everything works out. It's really the core that's the key. So you remember we were, putting a lot of water. Let me drop this hose down right in here, and if you dig down, it's still pretty dry, So even though you soak it, it kind of creates like a roof, and the water just runs out. So, coming in from different angles, just getting the water in is going to make a huge difference. The beauty of compost is the earth has been using it for millions of years. It's free. It does everything you need to take care of your garden. If you want to subscribe and follow me, I'll show you how this pile breaks down over the year, but more importantly, I'll show you how to take care of a garden, grow food, and have some fun. The key is going to be moisture. I will also link in the video description. I did a video called Green Core Composting, and you basically would take out some of the center here, throw in a bag of the green grass, just like you would put in a plastic bag that stinks and smells really bad. But you put that grass into the center here, cover it back up, that core heats up, it does the same thing that I just showed you. And it's cheap because it's free grass, so it's an easier way or cheaper way to do things. It does take a little bit of work of setting up the pile. Don't forget to keep the piles really moist. Soak them down that first couple of weeks until you know that the hydrophobic leaf particles and leaves have absorbed the water, and then you can pretty much let it go. Again, thanks so much for watching. Please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com. Please check out my blog at therustedgardenblog.com, and please subscribe. I'll teach you how to grow food and have some fun.